Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Jill Luber, and she's a longtime technology and data leader whose career has included building the data backbone behind analytics products, leading major technology integrations, and overseeing engineering teams responsible for core linking and scoring systems. With deep expertise in data engineering, security, and analytics, Jill is known not only for her technical leadership, but also for her collaborative approach and strong customer focus. So, in this episode, we will explore how technical professionals can communicate more effectively with mixed audiences, why storytelling matters in technical presentations, and what organizations can do to make communication a true priority across technical teams. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Jill.
Hi, thank you for having me.
First question: how have you seen communication break down between technical and non-technical teams?
Um, yeah, thanks. Great question. Glad to be here today. Yeah, long career in technology. Spent a lot of time explaining technical terms and capabilities to non-technical folks, especially in the commercial side, sales teams, customers. And I think where a large part of the breakdown comes from the intent of the communication. So for someone who has the technical skill and understanding, what is the intent of your communication? Are you trying to make sure the person understands the technology or the outcome? And very often, if you reframe it to think, I want the person to walk away with an understanding of the technology, you're going to get lost in jargon. You're going to get lost in technical terms that aren't translating and aren't real to someone who doesn't have that training. But if you think about the outcome and like, what does this mean to this person? What does it mean to this customer? And you explain the what instead of the how. I think that really helps bring to life the technical capabilities. In fact, they become more impressive with what is the technology actually doing for me? What do I gain out of it? As opposed to understanding the nuts and the bolts and the right, what kind of API I'm using, and right, you can get into terms that just aren't as meaningful to a non-technical audience.
Yeah, that's definitely can be an issue. I know when I first started giving presentations, I had to do so in front of senior management. I was working as a product development engineer. I had to do it on a monthly basis, and I definitely was focused more on the how than on the what. And a lot of jargon that I just assumed people understood. It turns out they didn't because I'd get a lot of questions afterwards about that jargon, and then I start thinking to myself, well, if you didn't understand that word, then you probably didn't understand anything I said. So I mean, this was all just a waste of time for everybody. And you know what's so interesting, Jill? You would have thought I would have learned my lesson after that first presentation, but I didn't. After the first one or second or third, I'd still do the same thing. It wasn't until my project got canceled that I realized that speaking in front of people and making them understand the value of the project that I'm working on, it takes more than just telling them about the how and just making assumptions that they understand the value.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And there's also the intent of, to your point of just understanding the value. I do find that some technologists will want to explain how much they know about the technology, right? And so there's this need to like, I know what I'm talking, like you want to gain the trust and the confidence of your audience by using very heavy technical terms. Turns out it just does the opposite. If you get too technical, it's just like I'm not even listening anymore because I don't understand what it is you're talking about. So your intent of trying to gain that trust and gain the confidence of your audience, you've just lost it, in fact.
Yeah. And you know what? What would often happen is I would read the slides. And when you're reading the slides, you don't see what people are doing. And when you look up, then you see what people are doing. And it's likely not what you want them to be doing, which is looking at you or looking at the slides. They're looking at their phones. They're looking off into space. Some might even be falling asleep. Hopefully they're not
Yeah.
snoring. Hopefully they're not snoring, but they're doing everything but listening to what you have to say. And then you would think that at least from my perspective, well, maybe this is something I need to improve at. But as I said earlier, I didn't, and I made all these types of assumptions, and I would just hope that with this podcast and with my YouTube channel, I really want to help technical people not make the same mistakes that I did, or if they have, well, stop making them because it's not doing us any good.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
100%. Okay, so I'm curious to get your take on this too, Jill. There have been instances in which I had to give presentations, and I'm sure other people have had to give presentations, and the people in the audience, they have mixed understanding of what you're talking about. Perhaps there are some people that are fully business minded, know nothing about the technology really, but then there's some people in the audience that are very much technology minded and know a lot about your technology, and there's going to be people in between. How would you go about presenting to that type of audience?
Yeah, and I face that as well. And certainly now with the world of AI, you've got a lot of folks who are really interested and they've really been diving in and learning, and they know about the LLMs and the providers and the newest version of it. Because there is so much information out there, and like podcasts that are talking about the newest, because stuff changes so quickly. So you do have folks who are super versed in it, mixed in with the ones who are not. And so I do try to still take the approach of the outcomes. And you can mention within the how we're going to get there, we're going to get there, and you use the surface technical terms. You can talk about, when I was talking about LLMs, you can mention a model or even the vendor of the model. Do you need to talk about the fact that you're using command line um, access to a model versus going through an enterprise desktop application? No. I feel like you can get into that kind of detail and lose people where that's not really the important part. You can, is it mentioning a little bit of the how we're using these kinds of technologies, this technology stack, and these are the things we've learned. But the learnings again are about the outcome. We learned that we go this direction, it costs more money. We have higher latency, right? So our answers are not getting to our customers fast enough, and it's costing us more money. If you take those kinds of terms and kind of mix in with a little bit of the technology, again, because you do have some folks that are interested and they do want to know. They want to tell me more about that. So you can give a little bit of that tell me more without completely losing everyone. But it
Yeah.
is that's an art for sure. It's an art.
Oh, 100%. And it's one that, if I was being honest, I wouldn't say that I have it completely figured out. Although I would say that some ways to try to thread that needle is to prime what you're about to say. So if you're going to say something technical, say something like, well, to get more technical. And then you say whatever that technical thing is, so that at least the people that are technical know that it's coming, and the people that are non-technical know that it's coming too. And then if you're going to say something perhaps that's more business minded, you could say, in business terms, and then say whatever you're going to say. And then again, people are kind of ready to hear what you're going to say next, as opposed to being surprised by it. And then I think also another way to kind of to deal with that situation is to figure out the people in the audience. Who are the people that you really need to have understand? Is it the technical people? Is it the business people? And if it is one or the other, well, gear the presentation towards those people, and hope that the other people understand that, hey, you're here, but I mean, the decision makers are the business people. So this isn't going to be a technical presentation.
Right, right. And then I also have a tip with presentations that I always, and it feels silly, but it really is helpful. You start by telling them what you're going to tell them. You tell them, and then you tell them again. Right? Don't fear being repetitive, because sometimes you need that kind of like saying the same thing in multiple ways to really get the point across. If you really hone in on, what do I want my audience, is the point you're making. What do I want my audience to know when they leave this conversation? Say it in as many ways and as often as needed throughout the presentation to really drive it home.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Another question I would have for you, Jill, is what misconceptions do you think non-technical people have about technical people when it comes to communication, and how does that affect business outcomes?
An assumption I think I've faced is around the not having the ability to connect the technical know-how to the real customer problem. Again, I work in the commercial space, so I think there's very often this fear that, for instance, you'll have sales calls where you have a customer that wants to understand more about your product and tell me more about it. Let's get into the details. And there's a fear that bringing in a technical person into that conversation will pull the conversation down. It will be too technical. They won't really understand the real problems that the customer is facing. And they just understand the back end and how the nuts and the bolts work. So I think that there's a misconception there that I'd love to see more technical teams being called in front of customers because I think having the tech team hear firsthand the feedback, the problems, right, the goals of the customer, the more creative they're going to be in what they can develop and innovate on the technical side. And so I think there's some fear that you'll maybe scare off a customer from your tech team getting too technical and too into the weeds of what it is they do. That I don't find that to be true.
That's an excellent point you're making, Jill, because a lot of the times the technical people will receive these, the specifications that they need to use to develop whatever they have to develop, and they see it on these numbers on a screen. So this is what has to be developed. You have to meet these specifications. But if you are able to, as a technical person, talk to the people who are going to be the end users of that technology, it makes it more than just a spreadsheet of numbers or just a document with a bunch of numbers on it that you of specifications you have to meet. It makes it more, I guess it makes it more real.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, when talking about communicating, I think with technologists as leaders, we need to have a way of talking to the technologists as well to bridge that gap. One of the things that I do with my teams is make them ask the question about why. When there's, to your point, you're given a specification, you're given requirements, understand why that's what you're being asked to do. If you're implementing a new feature, why? What is going to happen if this feature is implemented? How's it going to help the customer? How's it going to help them achieve their goals? What are the outcomes? And I think if everyone in the organization understands the why behind what it is they're working on, or right, the change they're making, again, you're going to open up creativity. You're going to open up innovation because if you're down into the deep end with the technology, you're seeing the art of what's possible, the art of possible. That if you don't understand the why, you're never going to be able to meet the needs. So I think that's part of the leader's job in communicating is to make sure that that message gets all the way down to everyone in the organization.
I think you're right about that because, as I said, you're developing something, and it makes it more real when you understand the why. And at least then, as a technical person, you won't think the reason you're working on something is because that's what they told me to do.
That's right.
you,
Yeah,
you don't
right.
you don't want to be that, I guess, that order taker, and also you have to be comfortable and confident to ask
Yeah.
why too.
And some pride and some ownership in what it is that you've developed and what it is that the solution that you're offering to customers. You can have confidence that you are actually helping them.
Yep, absolutely. What role do you think storytelling has in technical presentations?
I think it has a huge benefit. I think the storytelling is what brings messages to life. It's what people remember, right? Facts, you remember it in a day, story, I'll remember it for a lifetime. And it's something that I have been called on many times to help, again, bridge the gap between the art of possible and technology and like, what's the real outcomes that we're bringing. I think if you can tell a story from how did we discover the problem? What did we do about it? What are the tests we ran? What did we learn? And here's the result. It's just so much more beneficial to take the audience on the journey as opposed to just spitting off like here are the capabilities we have. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like let's talk about how did we discover that we even needed that? I think storytelling of failures is also just as important. I think that we need to normalize the process of learning and going through iterations and trying things and failing and pivoting and moving on. I think that is a huge part that we don't do enough.
I
I
really
think,
like what you're saying, Jill, because if you just data dump on people, especially non-technical people, there's only so much that they can take in at any given time anyway. But if you couch what you're saying, the technical details in the form of a story, I think it's more interesting to listen to. And if it's gonna be more interesting to listen to, they're more likely to listen to it, and then they're more likely to make decisions that are better informed, as opposed to you just hitting them with a bunch of data and assuming that they know what to do with it.
yeah, there's also there's a moment of being able to connect it to your own experiences and your own space when you hear the story as opposed to your point, just the data dump of information. Another thing I like to do in communicating, I find I very often use analogies. So I try to take a very technical situation and like, how do I make this into an analogy that a non-technical person can feel and understand and something that they can connect to? Very often we use the car. So having like the putting code into production, like I had enough, for a car, I had enough money to buy the car, but I forgot about the fact that I have to pay for insurance and I have to put gas in it, and I haven't accounted for all of those costs just to maintain. Same thing with putting code into production. Like I budgeted to build the code, but now that it's in production, there's maintenance that needs to happen, and you have to continue to pay for it. And so having those kinds of analogies where someone can connect to it and go, okay, I understand what you mean by maintenance now. You have to continue to pay for it. And so I find often I do use analogies to really help drive that connection with non-technical audiences.
I think that's really smart using analogies. And now that we have generative AI, we could even come up with more analogies that perhaps we
Yeah,
wouldn't have come up with already.
absolutely. Really tap into the creativity there.
Yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
Jill, I mentioned earlier that I had to give presentations in front of management, and those first few ones were rough at best. I'm curious to learn your journey to becoming a communicator. Is that something you've always been good at? And if not, what'd you do to improve?
Yeah, so I mean, the answer is always practice. But I did, it was actually early in my career. I worked for a startup, and it was in the early 2000s, working for a startup. We were creating new technology to harness big data. So this was really the earliest iterations of big data computing. And I had to explain what that technology was and the advantages it had very often. As a startup, we were acquired. So when you're in that space of a startup being acquired, you often have to explain what it is you do in terms that they can understand the value to companies that are trying to acquire you. So part of the due diligence is explaining, because people, that's what happens in a due diligence session. They want to kick the tires. They want to understand, is this real? Is this technology really worth what we're about to pay for it? And so I found myself many times having to explain this technology and the value of it again to non-technical people in a way to really sell it. And it was, I think, some of that early rigor of presenting this to non-technical people, and we practiced it amongst ourselves, and we bring in other individuals who are non-technical, like, does this make sense? Give us some feedback. And so having that early exposure to really, I mean, it was, if you're a startup, like, it's part of like what we're trying to achieve, and it's such a, like, you feel like you're such part of the goal of trying to be acquired. That's the end game of a startup in most cases. And so with that really mission driven agenda behind this storytelling, I think having that as early as I did and seeing the power of it and then just continuing to practice has been really beneficial for me.
It's so interesting you mentioned all this, Jill, because my first job was at a startup as well.
Okay.
Although I well, that's where our similarities end because we weren't trying to be acquired, or at least we weren't acquired while I was there. And any communication that was done by my boss. I worked in a lab. I did a lot of testing and writing up of protocols and reports. And anything that I generated, I passed along to him, and it was his job to communicate any of that to somebody else. And I can tell you, I did not mind that arrangement. It wasn't until I took on that second job working as a product development engineer that I had to give these presentations in front of management. And interestingly enough, when I took the job, I did not know that was going to be part of the job. It was something that was brought to me a few months into it. And now, looking back on it, if that was brought up in the interview, I don't know if I would have taken the job. I might have still been in that lab writing up them protocols and reports and passing it along to my boss.
Right. Yes, because it can be scary. And so, there's thinking about how someone early in their career, they want to practice and they want to have better communication skills. For our organization, one of the pieces of advice I often give is to join our employee relations groups, and something, a group that speaks to you, that you would want to be part of anyway, your employee resource group, excuse me. And you can take on leadership and communications and speaking roles within those groups, which is really low risk. It should be an area that means a lot to you. You understand it. It feels very personal to you. And so you can speak freely to a group of your peers and get some of those skills, both speaking and leadership in your ERGs that feel a little more low risk.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. What would you say to a technical person who perhaps doesn't see the usefulness of becoming more effective at communicating?
That is very interesting. I think you will naturally find yourself in a silo, in a bubble, only speaking to other technologists. If that's the only way you can communicate as technologist to technologist, right? You're truly limiting yourself in what how you're able to move through any organization. I think you've got to communicate to your leaders, and at some point, your leader is not technical, right? You go up high enough, your leader's not technical anymore. As you gain more, as your organization grows as a leader, you're not all of your employees are going to be technical, right? So not your peers. Very often your peers aren't technical. So even if you're not a leader, you're an individual contributor and you want to explain your work and explain the value of your work, you need to be able to explain it to non-technical people as well. So if you can't grasp that ability, you're going to just limit yourself of who you can, what's your bubble of influence? Let's put it that way. Your bubble of influence is going to be in this very technical space. And it said at some point, that's even in your big tech companies, you come to a point where there are non-technical people that you would need to have these conversations with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, Jill. And at least I worked in medical devices and we worked in teams. So there was going to be a marketing person on the team, a manufacturing person on the team, a regulatory person on the team, quality person on the team. And I was the product development person on the team. But a number of people on the team who weren't technical. And we'd have meetings and we'd have to talk about what we were doing for the project. And, if I wanted to make sure that they understood what I was doing, I could hit him with all the jargon, which I did, but it wasn't a good idea if I wanted them to understand what I was talking about. Because who knows, if I would have been smarter about it, looking back on it, I would have been practicing what I was going to say in front of the senior management, in front of the team. But I was hitting them with all the same jargon I was hitting the senior management with. And I didn't get the hint from those meetings with my team that this probably isn't the best way to communicate. So then I'd get in front of the senior management and do the same thing. And then the consequences would show. Now I'm getting questions from the CEO. What does this mean? And that's not a great place to be.
Right. Right. Yeah, to your point, I mean, you have to communicate to your peers in the legal organization to make sure that what we're building passes all compliance and regulatory needs. You have to talk to your marketing team so that they can go to the customer and go to market and sell what it is we're building. But if you can't explain what it is in non-technical terms, how are they supposed to market it? So as I just feel like there's such a need that you're just going to really limit yourself into it's again I would call it your bubble of influence.
Yeah, I didn't think about any of that when I was working when I was working as a product development engineer. Interestingly, yeah, all I thought about was my part of the puzzle, and that was the technology part, and everything else. Well, other people were going to be responsible for that. I didn't even think about the technology once it was out of my hands. Once my part was done, I didn't even think about how this was going to benefit a customer. All I
Right.
knew is that someone's going to sell this, and money's going to end up in my account every other week, and that's good enough. And it took me a number of years to realize, well, that's definitely not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. I think it's if we knew then what we know now, right? So this is moments where we can explain the values in some of these communications and just what part you play in an organization as a technologist, and it is bigger than just the technology. I think that's really important. And again, I'd really try to create this sense of ownership and pride in the solutions we build for my team so that they want to put out good code. They want to make sure that the solutions work. They want to make sure that it's, better, faster, and cheaper than the competitions, and just have a real ownership of it.
Absolutely. This has been a great conversation, Jill. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Thanks so much for having me. I am on LinkedIn, so Jill Luber at the Elsevier organization.
Wonderful. Everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.